Right. I think we're recording now. All right. Well, welcome to our sixth and final session here for our problem solving series with Dr. Judy Elliott. We are so excited to wrap up this six-part series and go through part four, I believe, is what we're going to cover today. So this is obviously being recorded so that we can refer back to if anyone doesn't have a chance to sign on today. So let's kick it off and get into session six.
Great, thank you. It's nice to see everyone today. It's a crazy time of year, so appreciate your attendance at this. I'm going to make some teaching decisions as we go through this, based on what y'all come to the table with. So some of the goals I thought we could do today was, if needed, do a quick review of step 1 through 3, see how you're doing with that. Definitely digging into step 4, so that we can talk about, did it work? Did your plan work? And then if there's any burning questions that we need to address as we wrap up this series, that's what I thought I would do. So before we go, I would just love to hear one or two of you. If you were a superhero, what would your superpower be today?
I think my superpower would be to make the perfect weather. 78 degrees and sunny.
And no humidity.
No humidity and no bugs.
Awesome.
I think that's a great one. Well, first of all, I want to be Wonder Woman because she was my favorite when I was younger, and I can remember watching those shows. But if I were Wonder Woman, my superpower would be to do everything like very quickly, like how she spins around. I just want to have everything accomplished very quickly, like Wonder Woman.
Cool. I think my superpower would be, I don't have a superhero, but my superpower, I mean, I can fall into any one of those heroes, would be to, gosh, it's gotten so complicated. I usually want to say, spread peace, spread acceptance, undermine the racism that's going on in the country. We have a pretty tough culture right now in our country, and lots of people are getting hurt by it. So that's sort of what I would like to see. Everybody just take a deep breath and let's be kind to each other. So thank you for that. So it's fun to do that with kids. So when we started this together 5 sessions ago, we started talking about MTSS as a framework. It's not a thing. It's not it's not a program. It's a framework. And so use this with you a few sessions ago. So without a framework, you got pieces and parts. And then with a framework, which y'all have in South Carolina, you've got something that's more coherent, more integrated, and you're able to monitor and adjust as you go. So, and those components fall under what you are all familiar with as a SAM. So there's 6 components, excuse me, of the SAM, and you can see them. And the one that we focused on for this series was the problem solving process. All of them are intricately connected and all lead to the multiple tiers. So you got to have all of the other buckets in order to get really solid tiers. And so this is a tool, if you haven't seen it or used it, it's an amazing tool that you have at your fingertips. That really just tells you what are the bearing walls that you need to have in place in order to put an MTSS system together. So highly recommend it. So what I wanted to start with was the rationale for the 4-step problem solving process, because the first time you go through it, I always reference it as a slugfest. You're like learning it and you're getting through it and you're really like, wow, is this really worth it? Yes. When you get through all 4 steps, it's incredible. So there's a rationale for it. Because it's a very detailed process, you're not going to problem solve every little thing that comes across your desk. First of all, you're using data to monitor whether what you're doing is resulting in return on investment for kids. You're determining which kids are, zooming and which kids need a little bit more support. And then you're specifically implementing, intensifying instruction and seeing of those, which ones really are making a difference for kids, which ones are matched. The one I wanted to just underscore is this process. You can use it for anything. However, when you really use it is when everything you've done for a student or a group of students hasn't worked, hasn't made the growth expectations, and you really don't know what to do next. So you're like, you've run out of tools in your tool belt. So, and there's a need, as the second bullet says, to really identify, is it instruction, curriculum, environment, learner? What is the combination that's causing there to be a lack of growth? So truly, if you're stuck, you've tried everything, it doesn't work, you don't know what to do next, then you engage for sure. Once you get used to the verbiage and all that around this, you just start using the words like, what's your hypothesis around it? What do you think is the reason for that? So I just wanted to pull that back out as we wrap up our time together. So the problem solving process, we're going to do step 4. And I always like to point out to people, this is where RTI lives in MTSS. RTI lives in step 4. Did you get response to instruction and intervention? So MTSS is the overall, 4-step is within that. And then did it work is where your RTI is, response to instruction. So I always like to point that out. So the 4th step is really, if you're going to do individual, school-wide, certain groups, you're going to implement an evidence-based intervention or intensification of instruction, and then you're going to monitor to see whether it worked. So, and remember in step 3, you laid out all those data that you're going to look at and collect when you do this. So now when you have all that and you implement your plan, now it's time to say, did it work? So, any questions on that so far? Okay. So we look at step 4 in terms of, did you get good response to instruction? Did you get questionable response to instruction, or did you get poor response? So really you're looking at 3 things: good, questionable, it's kind of come see, come saw whether you had some good growth there, and then poor. So when you evaluate your effectiveness, it's always sort of the calibration for everybody to know is, did we really intensify instruction? Was it evidence-based? Was it intense enough? Do we need to make it more intense? What do we expect this intervention to do for Judy? And did we implement it with fidelity and as it was planned? And I always want to say, did we implement it with sufficient time? Because a lot of times educators will start doing something, and if they don't see immediate change, they stop what they're doing. When a student or group of students need a little bit more time to get their feet grounded in what you're doing with them. So, and then the last one there is, if you're using a vendor or a product that you purchase, just make sure that whatever you're using it's been standardized for the group of students that you're working with. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, good. So criteria for intensification of instruction, and we talked about this a little bit in step 3, make it evidence-based. And I choose the word evidence versus research because as a teacher, I did a lot of stuff that people would go, that worked? Yes. If you stand on your head and wiggle your toes and your kids learn to read, evidence enough for me. So research-based is great. Evidence-based is the same. If it really works, use it. Fidelity, integrity, sufficient time, and you evaluate it frequently to make sure if you're moving or not. And integrated across the tiers means, if you're going to do it in a tier 2, make sure that you generalize that practice and that skill into tier 1. If you're working with students in a tier 3 setting, make sure that we help them generalize when to use that in core. So I'm just going to walk you through the good, questionable, or poor. Why don't we do that first, and we can go back and see if you have any questions about the step 3, because we sort of did step 3 again last time we were together. So let's take a look at this. So what is good response to intervention? It means that when you look at the data, you can see the gap is closing, and you can see that over time, they're going to close altogether. So this is an example of positive response to intervention. So on the left-hand side of the perpendicular line, this is sort of the baseline. And then the intervention is the perpendicular line, sort of on the first third. The yellow line is the trajectory where you want the student or students' growth to go. So if they came in really low and we want them to follow that trajectory to get them where we want them to be at the certain time that we need them to get there. So in this case, whatever intervention or intensification they're doing, it had a pretty strong response because you can see how it is closing. Here's another example. Take a look at this. There's a student, Mackenzie, a class average and a grade average. What do you see here between test 1, test 2? How are they doing? Good
They're
question.
increasing.
Say that again.
The scores are increasing, percent
Yeah,
correct.
who's got the greatest slope of the line?
Mackenzie.
Mackenzie does, yet she has a big gap. But if you were to trace that, I don't have a pointer here, but if you were to trace the blue line all the way to the end of, the end of the school year or February, if she keeps on that same track, she may be pretty close to meeting her peers by the end of the school year. So the slope of the line matters. So grade average, nice slope, and then class average a little bit less, but still slope. And then Mackenzie's the kind of kid that typically would say, well, we need to refer her for special ed because she's growing, but the gap is so huge. It's a but. Don't do it, because whatever you're doing, I liken it to, a fish in a fishbowl. If you give it a lot of oxygen, it's going to be healthy and move and, do all the right stuff. So Mackenzie's knocking it out of the park because whatever we're doing with her is working. All right. So let's look at this one. Just look at the colors. This is progress monitoring. And looking at this across 4 assessments, students A through S, and then there's little pie charts on the bottom too. Whatever they're doing in this classroom, it's kindergarten. How are we doing?
Can I ask a question about this one?
Absolutely.
Green says initial. What does that mean?
That I don't really even know the answer to that. Initial is like their probably their initial stage of learning on this progress monitoring, or that may be that where they are in the intervention that they're doing. They're at the initial stage, because red is intensive and strategic, which is tier 2, is yellow.
Yeah.
So initial means, it's a good question, but I go by the colors.
Okay. Well, overall, I think it represents that most of the kids, if green means getting what they need, then most of the kids seem to be getting what they need, except assessment 2, whatever that material is covered. A lot of kids need some strategic support in that one.
Yeah, and when you look at progress monitorings like this, if this is a DIBELS or a whatever it is, we know that the content gets harder as you go across each assessment. So they may have done really well in assessment 1. Assessment 2 demands a little bit more of them. Assessment 3, a little more and a little more. So student A is in great shape across all. You look at student R and S on the bottom, they started red, they were yellow for a little bit, and they ended up by the 4th assessment, they're a green. So whatever's going on in this classroom around instruction is really having a positive impact on kids. Because by the time you get to assessment 3, there's much fewer strategic. Okay, cool. So what do you do? What are your decision rules if you say, okay, well, whatever we're doing with Judy is working, she's moving in the right direction. You continue to do what you're doing. You can also increase the goal. You could push the goal to a little bit higher since Judy's moving in the right direction. And at some point, you're going to want to fade what you're doing so that Judy can do it on her own without having a lot of support. Or it may be something that you can't fade. So once you teach a student how to read, you can't unteach them how to read because they've already learned how to read. So there's no fading that. So there's some things that you can fade and some things you can't. So positive means everything's working well. Rule of thumb, 3 to 5 weeks or 3 to 5 data points before you take the training wheels off and fade. So fading means you do it a little at a time, but you want to do it in a way that we don't crash the bike. So training wheels come off between 3 to 5 weeks. All right. Any questions with the first one? Groovy. Let's look at, we're going to go to poor because you can tell positive, you can tell poor really quickly. So poor on the bottom there says the gap widens, the risk gets worse. They're never going to meet. And here's an example of that. So left-hand side of the perpendicular line, students are low and they just follow their own trajectory and they never the twain shall meet. They're so far apart from the yellow as we go on. So whatever we're doing here is not working for these people. Let's take a look at this one. This is on-task classroom behavior. So this is McKinsey again with the peers. The blue line is the trend line, and the purple line is where we want the growth to be. So what do we see here?
Well, we don't see enough data points to make an instructional decision at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But based on
Yeah.
the baseline data, the trend line does seem to be on the right trajectory, and you might need to increase the goal.
So baseline, if you look at McKinsey, she had a nice slope of the line for the first two, and then she dropped.
Yeah.
The same thing with the peers, although they're way higher, they had a little bit of a slope up and then they really dropped. So the rate of growth is going in the wrong direction. It's going down instead of up. Did you see that? So
yeah, I just don't see enough data points after the intervention, after the phase change line to give us
there isn't
enough
any,
data.
right? Yeah, you're right. So even before they did the intensification and added their intervention, the kids were going in another direction.
Yeah.
So whatever they had going on in the classroom clearly wasn't working, or it was working for a bit and then they got satiated and it didn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Great observation. Here is a school district that superintendent said by 2017, all of the freshmen need to be on track. At least 90% of the freshmen need to be on track. So I asked the folks at the high school levels, like, so how are the kids doing? Where are you with it? Well, nobody had looked at it. And so pulled up their data and no bueno. They're moving in probably the wrong direction. They're going down instead of up. So it doesn't mean that they're doing horrible things. It means that they're going in the wrong direction. They're not looking at their data frequently enough to say, we got to change direction here. Does that make sense? So, and then this is the last one. I'm not going to unpack it with you. I just want you to look at the colors. So this is one-on-one instruction for BART. And so the blue line on the left hand is the baseline. And then they instituted, it is PALS, the strategic tier 2 PALS reading program that really looks at grapheme phoneme and comprehension. The red line is where BART is supposed to be going. The little dotted red line. How's he doing?
Bart's not going to make it.
No, BART is not going to make it. He needs oxygen now. Yeah. So the aim was that he learns 1.5 words per week, and he's learning less than a word a week. So this is not a good. So if you don't look at this regularly, so data points are important. 3 to 5 data points immediately will tell you enough information, either pre or post the intervention, as you said earlier. You got to know when to jump in and make a change. If it looks as the data here, they just kept collecting data on this kid and he's not going to make it, but they didn't change anything as they went. So that's a really good example of poor. So what do you do when you have a student or students doing poor RTI? You go back and say, did we do what we said we were going to do with fidelity and integrity? And if you didn't, go back and do it, because sometimes it doesn't come off the first time. So if you didn't do it the way it was supposed to be, go back and do it and see what happens. If you say, yep, we did everything to the T with what should have happened for BART or McKinsey, So what you want to do is you want to go back and say, did we have the right hypothesis? Did we have the right rabbit hole? So is your instruction aligned with the verified hypothesis? So if you say there's a lack of engagement in a classroom and the intervention design doesn't have anything to do with engagement and the kids are not getting better, you're misaligned your intervention with your hypothesis. Does that make sense? So if Bart's reading issue is fluency and reading grapheme phoneme fluently, and we're doing a full court press on teaching reading comprehension strategies, and he looks like this, we've missed the boat with this kid, because we're talking about he needs fluency in grapheme phoneme reading, and we're doing comprehension strategies and decoding strategies. Does that make sense? So if it doesn't work, you're going to go back and look at that. Are there other hypotheses? You go back to step 2 and say, are there other root cause analysis for why kids are not moving? Did we go down the right rabbit hole? That's the key. So I always give this example. When I was in Los Angeles schools, third graders were not reading on grade level, and the Board of Education was very concerned, as I was. And so when we started doing some problem solving around it, they're saying, well, we've had the same reading program in elementary for 10 years. Teachers are over scaffolding. Of course, you always say the teachers are over scaffolding. The material's old, blah, 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 blah. So LA at the time had about, I think 380 elementary schools and $45 million to put a new reading program in. So I said, before we do that, let's do some hypothesizing. Why do we think kids are not reading by third grade? Then we started digging into, oh man, I'll just give you long and short of it. So all of their hypotheses were it's old, kids aren't coming to school, or they're this or they're that, or teachers are over scaffolding. And so when we did our hypothesizing, we looked at attendance data. Guess what the highest rate of truancy was at the time in Los Angeles? K1, K2. So lots of kids were not in school. At the time, 78% of the district was Hispanic, and Hispanic, as you know, is a very familial and cultural origin. And so when mom had a doctor's appointment, the kids went with mom to the doctor's office, or if the brother had something going on, everybody went to that. So had we adopted a new reading curriculum and trained everybody in it, we wouldn't have got a return on investment, because that was the wrong rabbit hole. We were just saying, oh, 10 years old, let's get a new reading program, versus the problem identification, which is so critical, is that it was an attendance problem with parents pulling kids out or not bringing their kids to school because of other family things. And so what we did, instead of doing a reading program, we did a full court press on parent participation and community outreach to make sure that parents knew how critical it was for kids to be in school. That's just an example of what happens when you go down the wrong rabbit hole, and you may get poor. You may just have identified the wrong problem, or we need to do a little bit more hypothesizing. So the last one is questionable. Questionable means that, you're seeing some growth, but the growth is pretty slow and the gap is widening a little bit, but it's slow. So it's like a trickle. And so it looks like this. So take a look at that one. That's like parallel play, if you will. They're not going to meet. So initially, on the right-hand side of the perpendicular line, when they started doing their intensification, you did get some nice growth. They did move, but not enough to close the gap, and not fast enough. Everybody see that? Here's another example. Here's McKinsey again. So what is your observation here? So we saw McKinsey between test 1 and test 2. Woo! Now what do we see across all of them?
Well, her progress looks very similar, but there's still quite the gap. And I feel like this is the type of profile that we often see in MTSS meetings when you're reviewing individual student data. They're making adequate progress, right? Comparable progress, but the gap is still there. And a lot of times, this was actually my question, a lot of times there's a push to put them back in the gen ed classroom to remove them from that intervention to see if they can transfer the skill. And then that gap just continues to what they don't have that generalization.
Well, and one thing to see if they can, we've got to teach them how to generalize because kids don't spontaneously generalize, as we know. This is, if you go back to the fishbowl example with lots of oxygen. So if you look at the green, the grade average still is moving a little bit. It's got a little bit of, just a tiny bit of going off, but the class, I mean, because the grade average is all the grades, her class leveled out, basically flatline between test 2 and test 3. So if McKinsey is a kid that needs a lot of oxygen in her fishbowl, and there's no more oxygen coming to her at a regular basis, she's going to drop. So for kids like McKinsey, that evidence-based instruction and high rate of engagement and checking for understanding is so critical that if that stops happening for kids like McKinsey, they're going to level off. So she still had a little bit of growth, even more than her class average. She looked more like her grade average. But this is going to be like, you know, refer her to special ed, when in fact it's not her necessarily, because what we started to do with her was really making a difference. Okay, questions about that one? Okay, I'm going to give you one more. I think this is Over the Rainbow. Is this Over the Rainbow? No, it's just a high school. So ODRs, office daily referrals at the school level, they're current. And if you're an administrator, you'll be going, oh my God, 7,600 referrals to the office, 7,615. They want to get them down to 200 or 2,000, and they give themselves 2 years to do it. So on the bottom here, if you take your 7,615 minus where you want to be, they've, you know, this is what they've got to get divided over 2 years. So 5,615 is what they're at after they take up their goal away. And so they're giving themselves 2 years. So you divide it by 2, and that means that they've got to get no more than 2,807 in order to meet their goal in 2 years. Does that make sense? Okay. So 7,615, they want to get to 2,000. They subtract those 2. They get 5,615, and they say, okay, we got to do this in 2 years. You divide the 5,615 by 2, they've got to hit 2,807. All right. Take a look at this. They started out at 7,615. What was the number they had to reach in order to be on track? Do you remember?
So it was 2,807 less. Was that right? They had to reduce by 2,807 each year?
They couldn't, yeah, they couldn't be more than 2,807.
Okay.
So obviously they didn't make their goal. Some yummy things that occurred of it is on the bottom, they gained 2,100 hours of instructional time because the less kids were being referred out, and a lot more administrator time doing stuff other than dealing with, you know, behaviors. So would you say that these guys should throw the baby out with the bathwater and start over again? What do you think?
No, I think they need to probably analyze what those referrals were about and where they were able to decrease those referrals, and emphasize the work on the places where they still need, they're still getting referrals. What are those?
Yeah, so you wouldn't, you know, they didn't suck at this. They did actually pretty well. If you look at their trend line, so the red is where you want to be, and they extended it. Even if we do it the same way over 3 years, we're not going to meet. If you follow that blue line, they're just going to be farther and farther away, even over 3 years versus 2 years. So they did make some growth. celebrate that. It just wasn't, maybe it wasn't intense enough. Maybe it needed to be more frequently. All of those things need to get looked at. So when you get to a poor, or I'm sorry, a questionable, did we implement it as like we were supposed to? If you didn't, go back and implement it. And what I said, if you did implement it with intense fidelity, maybe we just need to intensify, ratchet up the intensification for short periods of times to see if you get a spurt. So if you intensify it and you get a movement, then you're like, okay, we're on the right track. And then if it doesn't, after doing all of this, it doesn't do anything, then you got to go back to the drawing board and say, let's go back and look at our problem identification and see if we got it correct. Questions about good, questionable, poor?
No, I like breaking it up into 3 options though, not just did you meet your goal, but let's look at the progress over time, that rate
Oh.
of increase over time. And questionable could mean some things are going okay.
Yeah, we're on the right track. We're just not on the track we want to be on.
Right.
So, I mean, there's good stuff going on here. It's just not going as fast. Same thing here. We had great momentum going and then we bombed, slowed down, didn't bomb, take that back, just slowed down. If you don't look at your data frequently enough, you're not going to know that that's happening. And then it's going to be too late to pull the kids out of where they are. So I would like to just show you what Happy High School did. And then we're going to stop and have an opportunity for y'all to share sort of your step 1 through 3 and then where you are and step 4. And we'll just do an inventory to see where you are. So Happy High School, we went through their step 3, the last 2 sessions. So the difference between expected and current performance of math exists because insufficient is not maintaining high levels of student engagement. Okay, so this is their step 4. I'm going to give you a minute to read. Just read it. The easiest way to do it.
So it looks like they had some positive results from their work.
Yes, that's what it looks like. We'll unpack this. So they wanted improvement on their formative assessments. They wanted improvement in their classwork and homework completion. And it moved from 71 to 76 from quarter 1 to quarter 2. And the baseline went up 15%. And the student engagement, remember they used that walkthrough protocol, went from 73 to 77. So good, because the baseline was at 67. So they engaged in this problem solving and they said they definitely have positive response to interventions moving in the right direction. And this is what it looks like. So passing is the red one and engaged is the blue one. So here's where they were when they started. And you can see passing went up and the numbers on the bottom, you can see by what, and the blue, they're just hugging each other on top, which is interesting because the more engaged the students are, they passed, they had better grades and better success, that's what we know about that. So the baseline is on the bottom, 73, 77, 83, 87 on passing. And then you can see what it looks like for engaged on the bottom. They started at 67 and quarter 4, they ended at 88. Woohoo. So this is a really good example. Whatever Happy High School did, and we know what they did, worked. So the questions to link to that on the second half of that slide, if response to instruction and intervention is positive, there's those three things that we talked about. Continue the supports, ratchet it up a little bit, and fade. So what they said, which was really cool, is kids that are not at least 75% are going to be grouped together one time a week to do preview, review, reteach, instructional stuff that they may be missing. So all of the kids are going to get a 1 week extension or remediation, if you will. So 75% is pretty good, but they want to get them higher. So the kids that are already there are going to get an extension. The other kids are going to be grouped and work together. They're going to use cooperative learning strategies to make it, interactive and fun and not be like a punishment. So that's Happy High School in a nutshell. Awesome, right? Yes, Judy, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your step 3 to step 4. I know some of you are still in the process. It's the time of year you write your plan. It's really hard to implement it at this time, or it's even difficult to verify your hypothesis sometimes. So the word here is step 3, evaluate whether your plan is working. What data? And then how are you going to know whether you have good, questionable, or poor? What data you're going to collect? How are you analyze? So Jenny, can I pick on you for this? So yeah, walk us through where you are with your 1 through 3. I mean, I don't know if you did 4 yet, but.
Okay. And I am just going to read it off to you.
Do you want to share the screen or?
Well, it kind of, I have.
It's messy. Okay. Yeah, just talk us through it.
So I just picked a school and I only have access to their indicator data that is reported through the state. So that's really all that I have to go off of. But what the initial concern was, in this particular school scored below average on the state report card for their student progress. So meaning the percentage of students that demonstrated expected growth was less than the target.
Okay.
They had almost 41% of students that demonstrated expected growth. And the benchmark for average, to be rated average, is 42%. So they weren't off by much. They were off by 1.1 percentage points.
Okay.
But that was the only area that they scored below average.
Okay.
So in just comparing to their peers, I looked at the district average and then the state. So 56.8% within the same district demonstrated the expected growth, and then 51% of students across the state demonstrated that expected growth. So definitely some discrepancy between that school and the district and the state, but in just looking at the benchmark level, they were just barely off. They could easily get within that average. So I made that goal to increase their percent of progress points to average, to the average rating by increasing their percentage 1.1 by 2025. And then step 2, where I started to go through why is this potentially not occurring, or why they didn't meet that benchmark. The first hypothesis was instruction related. So student progress is not being monitored consistently using progress monitoring tools. If they were using those, then school leaders would be notified when there's a lack of progress and be able to intervene and ensure all students are demonstrating progress. And then I wanted to review the school's progress monitoring schedule and the materials utilized. And so in my findings for that, only students that receive intervention with an interventionist or special education programming were being monitored using a curriculum-based measurement.
Okay, interesting.
So all students were provided benchmark assessments, but only those students receiving intervention from the interventionist. So that pull-out intervention. So I did validate that hypothesis.
Nice.
The second hypothesis I looked at was environmental, and that's the class sizes were too big. So if there was a reduction in class size, teachers would be able to progress monitor all students and ensure all students are demonstrating progress in ELA. And so I reviewed that teacher ratio to teacher to student ratio for the school, compared that to the district average and the state average, and indeed validated that hypothesis. And
Well, okay.
it was higher at this school with 16-1 versus 13-1 on the district average, and then state average was 14-1. And then finally, the third hypothesis was curriculum, and that there was a lack of intervention for students who were not making progress. So if students had access to interventions when they were struggling with concepts or classroom assignments, they would demonstrate progress once receiving appropriate intervention. Reviewed the interventions that were consistently implemented with the school and the students who were eligible to receive those interventions, checked for flexible groupings and the classroom intervention options, and then interviewed teachers regarding intervention program. And that hypothesis was not validated. The school is providing several intervention options for students at the tier 1, tier 2 in-class interventions in small groups, as well as pull out tier 3 reading intervention.
Awesome. Wow. That's fantastic.
Thank you for saying that.
That's amazing. Well done. Yeah.
It's really
good.
hard when you don't have access to all the data. I
It's
feel like I
true.
delved deeper on this, but I just don't have access to this particular.
But what you did with what you had was amazing. You validated, you picked your rabbit holes
Picked the rabbit holes.
and validated it, which is so important for all the reasons that we've talked about. So did you get a chance to put step 3 together?
I did, and this will be interesting to hear your feedback. So in the last session, we talked about if you have multiple hypotheses that you were able to validate, you suggested picking the low-hanging fruit. And so I felt like the lowest hanging fruit was to decrease the student to teacher ratio to align with those state and district averages. Reducing the class size would increase the teacher and student interactions and a teacher's ability to monitor student growth consistently. And so for implementation, I put frequency, how often, over and this I could probably do some more work on, but over the 2024-25 school year, so 180 days, starting in August, and the school leadership team would be responsible for that implementation.
And what they're going to reduce the classes?
Or reduce the class size. So if the average, if the average student to teacher ratio is higher than the district average, then they would put additional support staff within the classroom, or potentially add additional classes to accommodate a lower class size.
Okay. So there's a fiscal impact in that one.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. It's practice. You're doing it for practice.
Best case scenario situation.
Yeah.
And because most teachers, I think if you ask them, they would say it's hard when you have 25, 26 students in your class. It's really hard to keep a handle on all of that.
Yeah. I was always like, if I can pick the kids that you want to take out of my classroom, I'd be good with that. Because, 1 or 2 kids, 3 kids make it really difficult. So yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. One can throw everything.
Sure. Yeah. So the other one you validated was?
The other one was the progress monitoring.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I feel I did not go through the plan development for that. Step 3 for that.
Yeah, it's okay.
But I feel like those are pretty closely tied, in that if you're reducing class size, that also gives a teacher better access to those students, or more interactions, and the ability to really determine, okay, who's not making progress, and using progress monitoring tools for all students in class. Obviously,
I mean, I would think that if there's, a fiscal and they can't do the class size, I think at a minimum, the other rabbit hole is huge, that everybody's data gets looked at. Everybody's progress monitoring data gets looked at. It's not just the kids that are getting pull out, or the kids that are, with IEPs, but everybody gets looked at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's well done.
Thank you.
Well done. So if you were to implement that, going back to this slide, the data that you're going to collect, what data are you going to collect for the class size?
So for class size, I put The student teacher ratio. Frequency would be first and second semester. So those review dates would be on the 45th day and the 100th day of school, because I
Okay.
believe those are the 2 dates that they report.
Okay, that's when they progress monitor.
Yep.
Okay.
And so the expected performance would be that the ratio would not exceed the district average per grade level.
Okay.
And again, responsible party for that would be that school leadership team.
Cool. So you did a really great job with this. Wow. Well done.
Thank you.
Are you going to share this with the school you reviewed, or no, this is just, you're just keeping it to yourself?
I probably will. This is where my own children attend school, and I meet with that principal just because I like to talk data. And so I probably will share that with him. I had told him I was going to use his school as an
Great.
example.
Yeah. Yeah. No, great. I mean, I think well done, really well done. Do you, and so you can't really hypothesize whether you're going to have questionable, positive, or poor. So if you implement, then you'll know how to do step 4 based on positive, questionable. And and again, it's one of those things where you got to take your data points, as many as you can get from the beginning, to see whether or not it's actually moving in the right direction. So if you reduce the class size and they continue to sort of look like this, then class size wasn't the issue.
Right.
And I would say having everybody's student data looked at is really critical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, and I thought about that too. I mean, in theory, or in a perfect world, you'd want to do both, right? You'd want to reduce the class size and also monitor every student's progress, so that you can keep a handle on who's making progress, who's not, and then make changes accordingly. But you also don't want to do too much, right? You want to pick one
Right.
or the other typically, and start with one and see if that has any kind of positive impact.
Mhm.
Like I said, they don't have that far to go. They're 1.1%.
Yeah, no, it's good. Low hanging fruit for
Felt
sure.
like that's attainable. And they do a good job of progress monitoring in that school. I happen to have a kindergartner who receives intervention not from an interventionist, but from a reading buddy program. And they do not do progress monitoring. And so
Really?
that's sort of what led me in that line of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you know if that's working or not? That was the
Well,
question that
yeah, and I think, having been a teacher, like everybody works your fingers to the bone to get kids where they need to get to, pump them up and move them on. And then when you do an assessment at the end of the school year, or you do your whatever state assessment, and you see that it didn't get where you thought it was going to go, it's because we didn't monitor it along the way. So I always liken it to running a marathon. For all you runners out there, if you run a marathon, the goal is to get to the finish line in an upright position. And in order to do that, you got to have water stops along the way, checkpoints to make sure that you're hydrated and you're moving along the way. So when we don't do the water stops for kids, our finish line in education usually is your state assessment or some sort of summative at the end of the school year. And then if you don't land where you thought you were going to get your kids, you're just like, oh my God, it was such a hard year and I worked so hard and and it's not you. It's just that we didn't get the water stops in there. So that's a huge water stop, really needs to be done. So that's excellent. Well done. You get a gold star for the series.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. So, so that is the wrap for session 6. And again, what you illustrated, Jen, is, going back to this, it's not like they don't know what to do, but they're working really hard and they're just a little bit short. So you use that when you really feel like you just need some more information to push kids over the finish line. So it's a great process. And again, it goes back to your components of MTSS. Each one of these buckets has so much to do with it. And that's why the SAM is such a huge help when you're doing it, because it tells you what you need in order to get it where you want it to be. So, Our focus is on problem solving. I really appreciated the opportunity just to do the 4-step, because a lot of times when you get involved with MTSS, you go right to the tiers, right? Everybody's talking about the tiers. And leadership to me is huge in MTSS. Leadership, collaboration, relationships. Do you have a schedule under the capacity structure? Do you have the schedule to allow kids to go to an interventionist? Do you, how often do you look at your data? I mean, we basically talked about all of these buckets in just the little case study that you shared with us. So really, really huge. A lot of people fall short of not doing problem solving. So I appreciated ASC really digging in with this. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. And thank you all for joining our sessions. 6 sessions is a nice number for us to be able to get some good learning in. And I'm truly happy that we recorded all of these. So folks that, had things come in the way, will be able to go back and listen to the recordings. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I did want to note, I found the ISO by Riot matrix extremely helpful. When I was going through that, I kept pulling it back out and thinking through some possibilities when creating hypotheses.
Yeah.
And so I found that tool to be something that very useful. Having just worked in the schools up until November of 2023, when you get to that where you're evaluating, okay, is it working? Those are some of the hardest conversations to have. Everybody is emotionally invested.
Yeah.
It's hard not to take it personally if you've been working with that child and it's not working. Right. And so I guess I just wanted to reiterate that it's not easy, and these are hard conversations to have. Yeah. And that I like that this helps us bring us back to, we're just problem solving, we're
Right.
not blaming, we're not, we're
No.
figure out how we can help students be successful and meet their goals.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing up the ISIL again. That is an amazing document to use because it calibrates everybody's understanding. You get a common language, common understanding. Is it instruction? Could it be a curriculum issue? Maybe the teacher didn't have the right books or didn't know that they had access to, like we talked about last time with Elated Elementary School. But yeah, the ISIL is so critical. And it does, to your point. And I also think that the problem solving process sort of takes the energy away from personalizing it. So you're looking at data and you're hypothesizing. So I think between the ISIL and the problem solving, 4-step in and of itself, and I know that you have tips, which is a little bit, just one more step in there, which is very similar to this, really helps move it in the right direction.
Well, thank you, Dr. Elliott. This has been really, I think, very eye-opening, and I've been doing this a long time, but it was very helpful to me personally, and I certainly hope that everybody else got something out of it as well. So thank you for attending. These will all be on our website. If you can find previous sessions, this session, all the resources are linked on our website, so make sure you check that out. And until next time.
Fabulous. Thank you. It's my honor to work with y'all.